Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Bradley, and I am the programs manager here at ULED Arts and co-organizer of the exhibition Where There Is Power, alongside Renee Morales, who will be moderating the conversation this evening. Thank you all so much for joining us for this virtual conversation, marking the close of the exhibition and honoring the late artist Asif Farooq today on his birthday. Asif Farooq lived and worked in Miami, Florida, where he grew up the son of Pakistani immigrants. His artwork operates around ideas of impermanence and the existence and non-existence of truth. Farooq saw paper as a material that had a birth, life, and death, just like the human condition. His most ambitious project, Balalaika, is a full-scale paper replica of a Soviet-era MiG-21 fighter jet. Over the course of more than 8 years, Asif worked to recreate the fighter jet in true scale, wholly out of paper. From the plane's distinctive delta-shaped wings and pencil-like nose cone to the elaborate assortment of gauges, levers, consoles, and switches of its cockpit panel, he crafted every aspect down to the smallest detail with meticulous authenticity. Upon the artist's death in 2020, the plane was approximately 85% completed. Today, it sits in a warehouse space in unincorporated West Dade, where his studio team continues the project while working to preserve his artistic legacy. Tonight, we're honored to hear from his close friends and colleagues that have all played a crucial part of this monumental project in various ways over the last 8 years. But before we get started, let's all take a moment to wish Asif a happy birthday. After the conversation and Q&A, we'll close with a video of Rob Goianis, who unfortunately couldn't join us this evening, reading an excerpt from his book about Farooq's project. Please remember, any questions you have to drop them in the chat. We're going to be taking them throughout the conversation this evening. I'm going to go ahead and read a little bit of background for each of the speakers, and then we'll get started. Anne Strain is an artist and fabricator based in Miami, Florida. She received her training in painting and sculpture in the studio of artist Jean Gutierrez in her home of Greenwood, Mississippi. Since 2015, she has worked alongside late artist Asif Farooq on his large-scale paper airplane project, Balalaika. She is currently managing Farooq's studio on behalf of his estate and family. Erica Mohan is a visual artist born in Toronto, Canada, who migrated to the US with her family in 2000. For 2.5 years, she was the shop superintendent for Asif Farooq. Currently, Mohan works as a grants management specialist for Broward County Cultural Division, where she creates and facilitates grant programs for individual artists of all disciplines. She obtained a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Painting from Florida Atlantic University in 2014. Sterling Rook was born and raised in Miami, Florida, and holds a master's in fine arts from Florida International University, where he and Asif Farooq struck up a friendship in an installation art class. He is currently a resident at the Bakehouse Art Complex and recently completed a residency at the Deering Estate. Rob Goianis is a writer and editor from Miami, Florida. In 2014, he started working on a book about Asif Farooq and his paper sculpture of a Soviet jet fighter. Hundreds of hours were spent with Asif, and interviews with the diverse communities surrounding the artwork will form a sprawling oral history. The book twirls various literary modes to explore memory, the sublime, global immigration, grief, friendship, and post-Cold War history, amongst other subjects. Goianis' writing has appeared in many places, including Art in America, Bomb, E-Flux Journal, Jewish Currents, and the Miami Herald. And Renee Morales, my co-organizer of this exhibition, is the chief curator at Perez Art Museum, Miami, where he has organized more than 50 exhibitions. He spearheaded the acquisition of nearly 400 works from the Sackner Archive of Concrete Poetry for Pam's collection. He's a recipient of the 2019 Center for Curatorial Leadership Fellowship and is on the board of the City of Miami's Art and Public Places program. Renee, take it away.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to our panelists. Tonight is a really special occasion. Sadly, we lost Asif in August of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic, so the art community never really had a moment to kind of come together. We had hoped to do that with this program. Unfortunately, we had to pivot back to doing it virtually. Originally, we were going to do it in person, but because of the Delta variant, we decided it would be more prudent to do it this way. But it still means a lot to bring together all these folks. If you all could just join us now, that would be great. Just turn on your videos, please. And I've said it before, this exhibition was really a special one for me. Not the largest show I've ever done, but a really, really meaningful one, partly because the projects within it are so meaningful. Certainly, Asif's project is definitely fits that definition. I think a good place to start would be for us to talk a little bit with our panelists about their personal relationship with the artist, maybe some experiences. And then we can dig in a little bit more deeply into the Balalaika project. First, focusing on the more kind of material production side of the project, and then we can take a more interpretive approach. So with that kind of structure in mind, just loosely in mind, let's jump in and hopefully, again, apologies for the delay on starting, but hopefully we can still carve out a little bit of time at the end for some questions and audience engagement. But let's start with, let's start with Erica, if that's okay. There you are. Hi there.
Hi.
Tell us, hi, and tell us a little bit about how you first came to know Asif and your experiences working with him.
It's an interesting story. I bombarded Asif at a show because I heard of his work through his fellow artist from Primary Projects, Alex Sweet, and that's how I found out about the type of work that he was making at the time, which were primarily guns. But I bombarded him. He remembered me 6 months later, and he remembered exactly. He had a photographic memory, and he knew exactly what I was wearing, what I had said to him. And that's when I found out about the plane. And I started asking him, well, are you hiring? And he said, no. And I said, okay, well, are you accepting any volunteers? And he said, no. And I said, well, can I pay you to teach me? Because I really wanted to learn how to make things with my hands. I went to school for painting, so this was a totally different field for me. And at that point, he kind of like looked at me like, you're not from this planet. And I think he had told me a couple months later that I reminded him of himself back when he was trying to learn neon sign crafting. He had done the exact same thing. And so that's when he took me on, and everything just fell into place.
Great. Can we see the next slide, please? Sterling, tell us a little bit about how you got to know him.
Thanks. I got to know him first in undergrad. We both had a class together, and we struck up a friendship there. And then I didn't see him for a long time. And I reached out to him. I can't exactly remember why. And for whatever reason, we really struck it out, and we became, in a way, he became a teacher to me about in craft, in art, and dedication. Like, he was an example of what I thought a great working artist should be. And he kind of opened up himself he availed himself to me so that I could pick up whatever it was that, he had. Because to me, he was a complete artist, somebody who was dedicated, who thought about their craft and loved the art. And we ended up becoming, I guess I sort of became like a student in a way, but in other times as our relationship progressed, we would sort of advise each other on different things, personal and professional. And I'm a close friend.
Yeah. And tell us about your experiences with him.
So I met him maybe 2 or 3 weeks after he moved back to Miami from Jackson, Mississippi. And we became friends just through like being active in the art community here. And back in 2015, he hired me on to make uniforms for all of his staff members. And from there, I became one of his fabricators, like small detail fabricator here. And obviously I'm still here, so.
Yeah, it's so great that you have the plane right behind you, not fully assembled, but still it gives us a good sense of the scale. And here we have the studio team together with Jasmine and Sebastian also, who played a really key role in, particularly in creating this installation at Ulite. So we'll just let these images kind of roll along as we keep talking. But yeah, here again, you see just how elaborate and just incredibly complex and ambitious this project was. So again, the idea was really to recreate this, and that's Rob, by the way, Rob Goianis, who, as Amanda mentioned, couldn't be with us tonight, but he recorded a video with an excerpt from a whole book that he's been writing about Asif and about this project. But the project was to create this incredible machine that's right in front of them there from scratch, from paper. And let's get into a little bit of the mechanics of that project. So as the project evolved, so did the techniques of the studio, right? Every time a new form arose, the way I understand it, every time a new form arose, it took the form of a challenge. Like, how are you going to make this particular object out of paper? And some of the earlier approaches involved just using paper directly. But then over time, Asif and his team learned how to make paper pulp and mold it and sculpt it. And I wonder if Erica and, well, all three of you guys could really speak to that question. But Erica, let's start with that question. Can you tell us a little bit about, particular moments that really struck you from a fabrication point of view?
Well, the way he would analyze things, he was always reverse. Well, the whole plane was reverse engineered. So the way it was built was just through schematics and him just analyzing his knowledge of the plane, which was impeccable. And he wanted me to have the same exact knowledge. But granted, I couldn't live up to that standard. But he was always finding new ways of creating with paper. So whether that was using like toilet paper rolls or aluminum paper rolls, or even sanding down blocks of paper to create pulp. So when we were making some AR-10s, we would sand down black paper to create this black sort of finish that had a grip to it, that could actually replicate that same grip from an AR-10. And but even with the plane, originally he wanted the entire thing coated with this pulp, but then I guess over time he had changed that, and I think the decision he made in the end was much better, having it replicate these metal panels. But there was always new things he was coming up with. Like when he discovered phenolic resin, we would ship the landing gear. He would carve holes into it so it could be impregnated with this resin and have it withstand. The hope was to have it withstand the weight of the plane, but I don't think that was possible. There were just lots of different techniques he was always creating and always coming up with, and it was just such a joy to be with someone so creative, so inclined to always discover new ways of doing things.
Sterling, you talked a little bit about how, when we were talking about this earlier, you talked a little bit about how Asif was just really, really focused on the craft aspect of art making, right? One thing that's an interesting kind of paradox with this project is that it's very much a conceptual project, just conceptual in the sense that, the end result is preconceived, or the result was preconceived. And then it's all about the journey of getting there. And that, I think, has a lot in common with everybody from Sol LeWitt to that kind of like really, the conceptual art tradition. But at the same time, it's so very much based on the mark of the hand and the use of craft. And so can you tell us a little bit, Sterling, about Asif's position with respect to making and the importance of crafting in art?
Yeah, sure. He had a great love for things that were well made. And, I believe it was sort of almost an alchemical thing, even more than anything. Like, I believe that he sought a perfection in the making that related to finding an authenticity within himself, integrity of character. Like, I think those things were kind of inextricably tied for him, which is why I don't know, like if anything went wrong with the way he was making it, it would hurt him. Like, he would feel the pain, or if he felt something wasn't made well, which is why he was always updating the plane. Like, every time he made it, every time he got to a point where he wanted to be, he saw he could do it better. So then he would remake the plane and reach for a new mark of excellence. And I guess the bizarre part about that is you keep reaching a new mark of excellence, and then you have to raise the bar again, which is why the plane is so incredible. It is an incredible work of craftsmanship now, but I wonder, how much more perfect could he have gotten it? Maybe he could have gotten it to fly,
And does everything that you're hearing here kind of resonate with your experience with him?
Yeah, it does. Like Sterling was saying, he would work on something. I would think it was beautiful, and then he would want to remake it in a better way so that it looked, more like the actual live version of what he's creating. And I think that, seeing him make 3 different airplanes over the last 5 years, I don't know that he ever truly would have been finished with it. I think like he would have kept going, finding better ways to make things out of paper.
Yeah, it reminds me of that old story, or that old, I think it's like a philosopher's kind of an academic question of about the boat that is replaced along the way, along its journey, where one part will be replaced, another part will be replaced, and next thing you know, by the time you finally get to where you're headed, the question is, whether it's still the same boat that left the port, or whether it's a new boat. So it's just this kind of perpetual remaking of itself is just really interesting, and it just only amplifies, again, I think, the scale of the piece. And I don't mean the physical scale, I mean the scale of the ambition, the scale of the achievement here. We talked a little bit the other day about the idea of finishing this plane, and I asked a little bit of a provocative question to you all. Like, do you think that Asif wanted to finish this project, or was this something that for him just served as this kind of perceptual pursuit? It was almost like a reason for working, a reason for being an artist.
I think, go ahead, Sterling.
Yeah, no, I was just going to fill in the space there, but I think I was the only sort of dissenting opinion there, because at least I wanted to believe he wanted to finish it. I mean, oftentimes it was all he was talking about. It was like, just a few months left, just a few months left. But it's hard too. I mean, a lot of times if you're making an artwork, you don't know when it's finished unless it has to go into a show. There is no finished artwork unless somebody says they want to put it on a wall and show it. In the meantime, it's in the studio. I mean, unless maybe it's a painting, I guess. But I relate as a sculptor to something often changing forms. And maybe it was the case, that he would have just kept mutating it indefinitely. But I think he had interested people who wanted to see it done. So I feel like it would have been done. But go ahead, Erica.
I think he did want to finish it. The problem is, he was a perfectionist. So because of that, you constantly, as we spoke about earlier, wanting to change different methods for creating things, different components. He wanted the plane to consist of all of its individual components within the plane, with like the entire jet engine to sit within the plane, every single tube, every single rivet. He wanted it to show. And in the end, it ended up being too much, but I could tell like he was getting tired of it in some ways. There were lots of other projects we had discussed. We had talked about the satellite. He wanted to shoot a satellite into space and have it over Pyongyang in North Korea, like just blasting Metallica's first album. And another one was he wanted to recreate the Hadron Collider. We were actually going to apply for the residency at CERN for him. And, obviously the plane took priority, so we weren't able to do that. But there were so many other ideas that he had. And I think the plane, in a way, was a motivation, but also something that was, almost holding him back in ways, because he was such a perfectionist with it.
Yeah, we're with Asif, we're really talking about this kind of rare kind of artist who just is focused on something so grand that just becomes something that consumes him. I'm thinking about somebody like somebody like Bastian Adler or something like that, like people who have this sense of like completely throwing themselves into the piece, just like every bit of himself into it, just artists like that just have this almost extreme approach to making, like James Joyce taking 17 years to write Ulysses or something like that, so it's just really fascinating. By the way, we're working on a video that should be playing now. I think we're having some technical issues also, at least I'm not seeing it, but hopefully that'll come on in a bit. But yeah, I'm seeing someone mentioned in the chat that Asif dreamt of having this at the Smithsonian. I think that's interesting. Okay. Yeah, and I'm sorry. Did you want to add anything else to what we were just saying there? Do you think that that Asif wanted to finish this, or to ask the question a little bit differently, like how do you see this project in Asif's life? Is it something that he just wanted to kind of finish and move on to another project, or was he just going further and further into this labyrinth of making, or both? Maybe, I don't know.
You know what? I think it's a little bit of both. I think he was getting tired and he did want to finish, but I think in his mind, it never would have been finished, even if it was placed somewhere or bought by someone. I think that for him, it would never have been to his liking. because he was such a perfectionist, like Erica was saying. And, and he held all of us who worked here at a very high standard as well. We he wouldn't keep people on just because they were nice. Like he wanted to see like work at his same level, or like what he felt like, a lot of times, and he used to say this about Erica, that she was like one of his very best small detail fabricators that he had ever seen. So like he liked to keep people around sometimes that were even better than him at like some parts of what he was doing. But yeah, I think that like, especially the last 2 years, he just like, all he did was focus on the airplane. He would come home and be working on airplane parts from the house. It just took up his entire life. So I think he did want to finish, but I think that it never would have actually been finished for him.
Yeah, you mentioned those small details, which really are unbelievable. We at the exhibition at ULITE, we had, for example, the instrument panel with all the gauges and buttons and everything like that, and it was just amazing how if you look on the backside, it kind of reveals just how in a way how basic the approach was. These are the bottoms of paper cups serving as the little round dials for each of those gauges and everything. But on the other side, just the level of craft, the level of meticulousness is just amazing. And like a lot of great artists, I think he knew how to employ the material that he chose to use, while also, in a sense, respecting it, allowing it to be itself in a way. So I think this was as much of an exploration of material as it was anything else. And here, I'll jump in with another slightly provocative question. Do you think that it could have been something else other than a MiG-21? Would anything else have served just as well, just as good of a purpose, just as well as the purpose for this? You mentioned the Hadron Collider. That's another very charged and very complex object. But I guess what I would like to do here is to move a little bit more into talking about why a MiG, why the Soviet plane. And before you guys jump in, and I'm sorry for the preamble here, but I just want to be clear, this is one of those artworks that I think it is very productive to ask that question, why a MiG? But just the fact of just almost like the randomness of this subject, of this topic in itself has this kind of charge. Like at no point does Asif actually, to my knowledge, tell people. At no point did he actually say, this is why, I think like a lot of great artists, he leaves open the space where you kind of have to work to create your own interpretation and create your own kind of feeling for why. And that can be in and of itself, a really kind of a charge. There's a charge to that. So I wonder if y'all could kind of speak to that a bit.
Well, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say, and I don't know if this doesn't say why, but he was a history buff, especially Cold War history. Like he knew names and dates. He could pull them out like that. And I would just be like, okay, if you say so. I don't know why this is important, but it was really important to him the way I believe that he believed the way the Cold War played out shaped much of the way the world is now. Why was that important to him? I don't know, but it seemed to me that a MiG-21 was an important facet in that discussion. I often thought, well, why don't you make a nuclear warhead? Like that would be more impactful. But I think the MiG-21 was a more beautiful object for him too. And he also used to say, like, maybe this was just one of his jokes, probably was. He said, I wanted to make a paper airplane.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. He would love to say that, tell people that I'm just making a giant paper airplane, nothing crazy, you know, and then people would see it and they'd be like, what? But the MiG was one of the most produced supersonic jet aircraft in aviation history. And it was the most produced combat aircraft since the Korean War. So I know that was extremely important to him. And he used to talk about how, you know, MiG-21s now exist in people's backyards, you know, like they're dying in a sense. And something about that ephemeral nature of the aircraft itself was super important to him. And I love the fact that he was able to translate that to the plane now as paper. It is an ephemeral object, you know, in itself.
Yeah, one of you mentioned the other day that he once described it as a monument to impermanence.
Yeah, I said it was a meditation on impermanence.
A meditation.
I had heard him say that before. He also said that, like, he wanted to see it rest in the original airfield where it was first took flight. Like, there would be a poetic gesture to put the plane back in this airfield. So I believe in Moscow, or Anne probably knows.
Aerodrome, yeah, in Moscow.
And just let the elements have its way with it. Let it melt back into mud.
Yeah, and Erica, as you mentioned, there's something really poignant and in a way kind of upsetting about this thought of MiGs sitting around decaying, not just in Russia, right, but like in Nicaragua, in Vietnam, and this is like the equivalent of the AK-47, right? That's like,
yes.
It was mass produced on purpose, and it might not be as refined and as high tech as let's say the F-16 or something like that, but there was something about its directness and its ability to be mass produced that tied in so much to this very aggressive Cold War history, right? And that it certainly is. I mean, the MiG is just a real paradigmatic representation, like a perfect signifier for an era, right? And for this moment when the world was really binary, right? Where the power was divided in two. We live in a very different world right now. And here, maybe I'm reading in a bit too much, but he and I I'm still a little bit older than him, but he and I were pretty close in age. And something I can testify to there is that, particularly around the mid 80s, there was this like whole spate of movies about that kind of Cold War dynamic. And like it was in pop culture. And there were, like, you think about like Top Gun, and there was this movie called Firefox, like not like cinematic masterpieces or anything, but like, and in every case, the MiG was like the bad guy, right? It was like the signifier for this, like the evil empire, right? And I think this deep exploration of that subject for Asif must have been to some extent a kind of archaeology into that period. And Sterling, you mentioned earlier that the MiG had this kind of, and the Cold War in general had this world-defining effect while it was happening out, while it was taking place. But besides the level of, like, everyone, the 7 billion people on the earth, there's also the question of like how that Cold War dynamic affected so many of us personally, individually. I mean, certainly it did for me. My family was very, very much, my family history is very much a product of that Cold War struggle. And Asif, I gather, also his family history had a lot to do with these histories, right? He was originally from Pakistan, but his roots were you can trace them back to Afghanistan. Is that right, Sterling?
But it was my understanding, he told me, I mean, that, and I feel like I asked him the question once, like, did the fact that he was making the plane have anything to do with the Soviet influence in Afghanistan back in the late 80s? Was it late 80s, early 90s or so? I feel like I asked him that question, or that he told me it did. But you know, it's hard to say now. I wish I had a tape recorder to tape some of the things he said. But I felt like it was, or at least it was one of my theories, if he didn't say so himself, that maybe it had something to do with the Cold War conflict in that region back in the 90s.
Yeah.
But another reason I was thinking just now is it might have just been practical to make a MiG. Like, if you ever seen one, like at the Air and Space Museum, or there's one that's in Virginia, and there's an F-16, and then next to it there's a MiG. And I swear the MiG looks like it's half the size. So there might have been a practicality to it.
Well, you know, that applies to if it's practical to make a MiG as opposed to an F-16, that applies to, you know, whether we're talking about making it out of paper or whether we're talking about making the real thing. That goes back to what I was saying. Like, the AK-47 is like a crude weapon in a way, but because of that crudeness, that's why it's also the most common military weapon throughout the world. That's why it's able to be cranked out in this massive, at this massive scale. And, you know, let's not forget also the form of the MiG-21 is quite distinctive and quite beautiful, right? It's nicknamed the Balalaika. The title of the piece comes from the word Balalaika, which is the word for a particular kind of folk instrument, like a lute type of instrument, like it's triangular shape, that's very distinctive, that comes from Russian, you know, Russian folkloric traditions, right? So yeah, and that's significant too. I think Asif was not just he delved obviously so deeply into the material of this jet, down to, as Erica, you mentioned, you know, the things that are inside this piece that most viewers will never see, you know, unless you remove a panel and see all the wiring and all the hydraulics and stuff inside. Also, he delved really deeply into the MiG as a subject and as a historical artifact, right? And he researched it deeply.
Asif also mentioned that he wanted the plane to be shown in the lobby of the United Nations. Isn't that right, AK?
Yes, he wanted to see it in the Smithsonian and in the lobby of the UN. And he also wanted to see it in Moscow at some point, somewhere there. I don't think he had, like, you know, determined exactly where he wanted to see it. There were like a few options in the air, but those two places, definitely.
I had heard him say that he wanted it to tour the world, you know, to go from one place to the next.
Yeah. Yeah.
He said so many things, so many dreams.
He did. And they were all should have happened.
Yeah. And I think
he had a lot.
Go ahead, AK.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to say he had a lot of different ideas for where he wanted it to end up. Like, first he wanted it to go on a worldwide tour, and then eventually, you know, just be exposed to elements on a tarmac in Moscow. Then, you know, he would talk about burying it. He would talk about setting it on fire. He, you know, eventually he settled on the idea that it could end up in a permanent collection somewhere. He might be okay with that. So he just had a lot of ideas and a lot of different ideas that he shared with different people. So a lot of times people will come to me and have, you know, whatever version that was, he had in his head at the time, which is totally different from, what he had said 8 months before he had met the person I just talked to, right? So a lot of people have a lot of different ideas for what it was that he wanted, because it was constantly changing and evolving.
Yeah, like the plane itself, and God, that image that you conjured just now, Anne, of this this object standing on the tarmac and just decaying and weathering away, as it's just so it's so poetic, and it really ties into. Sorry, I'm blurry right now for some reason, but it just really ties into what we were talking about just now, this idea of all of these kind of deeper meanings to this project, and the way that it points out, it implies the futility of that same military industrial complex. And, the idea that we spend so much money to create these weapons of war only to have them ultimately become obsolete and be replaced by other things to spend money on. And it points out to the sort of the endlessness and the way, the insanity of this cycle. In that sense, and in so many others. Let me see if I step away a bit, that'll help. In that sense, it just really is such a complete artwork, and it works so well in the show, which ultimately is about power. Speaks to a lot of the themes in the show, like the relationship between power as this big, broad social thing versus power and its effect on individuals, on the personal. This piece really kind of encompasses that.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Sterling, go ahead.
No, you this time.
Okay. Something in particular about showing it in the UN, I think, was interesting. I feel like he wanted it to be a symbol, like an artistic symbol of coming together through like an object that is originally meant for combat, and like having it displayed with all these other countries was important to him. The idea of having art be the forefront, or showing something of combat in an artistic way.
Yeah, and in a way, transforming it into something, an object of beauty and an object of amazement, as opposed to an object of death and destruction, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was also kind of like a vehicle for his personal and his artistic empowerment, like that symbol, like the guns before it. Like a gun is a striking symbol and a striking object. And, they were these almost cartoonish renditions in a sense that were also very faithful to life. And I feel like they delivered a certain, just the presence of them, even though they were cardboard, it was sort of like the power was a little muted, but it was there. And I think the same thing kind of happened with the plane. Like it was a symbol of him attempting to have personal power in the world as an artist and as an individual. And I think the MiG was a vehicle for that.
That's a great point, Sterling. Yeah. And that comes across in the show as well. Like, the flip side of power, like power is not just something that is enacted upon us. Well, first of all, power is something that we all participate in to some extent or another. Just by like purchasing anything, we're definitely kind of participating in power dynamics. But there's, I think, a third dimension that's opened up in the show. We talked about this a bit a few weeks ago in the program with Reggie about empowerment, power in the sense of the individual taking on something that in a way proves that we are not just subject to power. And various works in the show, like Yusuf's installation, for example, really speak about how maybe power is not quite as powerful as we assume it to be. You know, that there are cracks in the wall, there are vulnerabilities there, and I see that here. You know, I was thinking, you know, this project has been described as like the most epic, or the most elaborate, the most extreme artwork ever produced in Miami, right? I would say that it's a real contender, along with, I would say, Christo and Jean-Claude's Surrounded Islands, right? That's another, just the massiveness of the ambition is kind of parallel here. And in both cases, they represent a single individual, or in the case of Christo and Jean-Claude, two single individuals. And, you know, we're not talking about a president. We're not talking about someone with a massive amount of power. We're talking about just regular, ordinary folks who prove by their achievement how much a single person can actually do, and the extent to which they can empower themselves to make something big happen, literally big. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's such a beauty to that sense of hope in the face of power. So I don't know if there's anything else that you all want to. We did have a question earlier. What's next for Balalaika? And that's actually, I haven't really talked that with you guys that much about it. I know you're working on it steadily, and there have been some conversations, right?
Yes, we've been in conversation with several different people. I think, you know, I think there are a lot of people that right now want to see something happen with it, you know, to honor Asif. I think that, I don't know, we've been getting a lot of help here at the studio. Thank you to everyone who has helped. But we are just moving things forward here. We're still open. We're open for studio visits. You know, we just opened an Instagram account so people can follow our movement on there when we have things, you know, news. So we're working really hard here to keep things moving in a way that Asif would have wanted.
You're working hard to complete that last 10% of the project itself, but also working hard to preserve it as a legacy, and also working hard to finding a way to project it out into the world, and to answer that question, what comes next for Balalaika? So that's really very amazing, or very important work that you all are doing there.
Thank you.
So I don't know if there's anything else anybody would like to add before we throw on Rob's video. We're looking forward to that. As also Rob Goianis, I think was really astute in recognizing that this was a project that was important enough to be written about. So we have him reading a few excerpts from that book. Is there anything else you all would like to add?
One thing, I have to say, Asif was my mentor, and he was one of the greatest teachers I could have ever asked for. He taught me how to literally take anything that I can ever imagine and create it with any medium I could ever imagine. You know, he was just, there will never be another person like him. And I just wanted to say that because it's his birthday. So
I just wanted to, I don't know what point this is, but, you know, I was thinking about him today, and by the time I had met him, it sounded like he had lived like 30 years, like, of hard labor. Like, he was a neon sign artist. He was a tattoo artist. He had been a welder, and plastic vacuum forming was another trade. Like, these were tricks that he employed, that he learned, that he employed in his life. Everything like came together in him at some point and crystallized in a vision that moved towards perfection. And I think that was something that I'll live with forever. He made a lasting impact on me. I mean, he came to my house and helped me organize my studio. he told me, you need to tighten up. And that's something I think about all the time. So yeah, I just want to leave you with that, with those thoughts.
And I'll say too, also, you know, Asif was my mentor as well. Obviously, I worked here for 5 years with him, and he working alongside him gave me so much confidence that I did not have before, in my own ability and my own level of skill. He was really good at finding what you were good at and like really pumping you up, you know, making you feel like you were incredible at what it was you were doing. So, I mean, I know Erica knows because he really had this ability to make you feel like you could handle anything, you were capable of anything.
He was great at that. And he wasn't afraid to tell his friends that he loved them.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
just to give you more human side of him. Like when I got off the phone with him, it was like, love you, buddy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was a very charming side of him that, you know, you don't find everywhere.
Yeah.
He had a very big heart, and he'd always like invite people into his shop. There was a homeless guy that would come and work for us occasionally. His name is Paul. Yeah. And like, not just him, so many people have come through and learned so much just from talking with him. Asif was an incredible person and very, very lighthearted, loved playing pranks. That was like his favorite thing.
Yeah, tell us about, I'm sorry, this is going to run long, but I hope that's okay with everyone. Tell us about about some of those pranks.
Well, you'll hear one from Rob when you play the video. I won't spoil that one. But he had, when you opened up his drawer, like there was a screeching cat. Like he would just throw that out there in the middle of like serious meetings. That's one of them. AK knows a lot more.
He was a big fan of Casa de los Trucos on 8th Street, right? Yeah. Speaking of which, Anne is holding that up. Yeah.
There was a fake bottle of mustard, I think, that he would like squirt at you. He would just pick it up and squirt at you. You jump back, and he would laugh maniacally because he loved to just laugh, and he had quite a laugh.
Oh yeah, unforgettable.
I'm not sure that making the plane wasn't just a ruse to get people to come and see him so he could play tricks on them all the time.
Yeah.
And at the same time, as we've discussed, making that plane in a way was a ruse or an instrument, above all, I think, for just the experimental exercise of liberty, the experimental exercise of freedom. To quote one of my favorite artists, Leisure Clark. So on that note, I think we'll pause here. I want to welcome back Amanda just to make a few closing remarks, and then go ahead and play that video, which I hope you all stick around for. It's really worth hearing Rob's perspective, and we all can't wait to see the book in print. So thank you all very much. Let's take one last moment before I turn it over to Amanda to wish a happy birthday to Asif, and to just share this moment where we're all together, all of us focused on him, and the impact that he had on this community, and the way that he modeled so many of the things that we've been talking about here. This incredible high level of perfection combined with this high level of support and big-heartedness toward everybody around him, and this uncompromising dedication to his work, his craft, and to his values of freedom and a better world, I think, ultimately.
Yeah.
Well, as Renee said, I can echo this. Thank you all so much for joining us for this beautiful and important conversation celebrating the life and legacy of Asif. And thank you to each of our speakers for coming together and sharing these insights and memories about Asif and his monumental project, Balalaika. I also want to say a special thank you to Asif's studio team, Anne Strain, Sebastian Ruiz, Jasmine Alvarado, and the entire Farooq family for sharing Asif's work with Ulite for this exhibition. To close this evening, as Renee mentioned, we're going to go ahead and share a video of Rob reading an excerpt from the book that he's currently writing on this project. But thank you all so much for joining us. Good night.
Hey everyone, my name is Rob Goianis. I am here tonight to read an excerpt from my book about Asif. I just want to start by saying thank you to Renee and Amanda and everyone else at Ulite for doing this and for also showing Asif's work. It really means a lot to me personally, and I know to the community of people that surrounded him and that loved him. I want to say happy birthday to Asif. And also that, I wish I could be there tonight, but I'm in a forest probably in Colorado. So we'll have to do it next time live. So I'm going to read an excerpt from a book I've been working on. It was started in 2014, and the plane and the book sort of evolved together in a lot of different ways. But I guess that's a story for another time. So I guess I'll just jump right into it. So yeah, here it is. Hopefully I can do this on the first take. The first night I met Asif in 2012, he was on a stage singing to a goat. It was Night of Weirds, which is exactly what it sounds like. A dark room with maybe 15 people in it, cigarette smoke gathering like a fog. I remember his croon, his voice breaking out of key, the goat baaing back. Hypnotic, schmaltzy, extraterrestrial is how I'd describe it. No, it wasn't the weirdest thing I'd seen, performance or otherwise, at Churchill's pub. After all, the Little Haiti Dive was where you went to see things you couldn't unsee, hear things you couldn't unhear. But it was a good set. Afterwards, Asif approached me. I'm not exactly sure why. He was wearing big black aviators, which he tore from his face. Before long, he was gripping my shoulders with his powerful hands. His eyes were wild big, searching mine. I don't remember what we talked about, but we talked excitedly, he faster than I could respond. At the end of it, my face hurt from laughing so much. It was as if we were already friends. The waitresses at Lapa Lapa remind me of scorpions. Their black heels stab the restaurant's floor, and their black jeans and black polos are like second skins. Black eyeliner curls out across their temples into little stingers. Asif and I were sitting across from each other in a booth, watching as they moved behind the long counter. I started going to Lapa Lapa Hondurena after I moved into an apartment a couple blocks away. This was Asif's first time eating there. He was telling me how he only orders the sopa de pollo from Metro Cafeteria, the Cuban spot over by his warehouse, in the unincorporated zone between Doral and Miami Springs. I'm friends with all the little Hispanic ladies, he said. It's nice. They ask about the airplane all the time. People were always asking about Asif's plane. Friends, family, artists, curators, NASA engineers, war veterans, model plane enthusiasts, and a nun named Sister Mary Catherine who graced Asif's warehouse in her habit. She was trying to sell him Christian calendars. Asif bought 2. One of the Lapalapa servers appeared next to the table, enveloping us in shadow. Her eyes narrowed. We tried our best to order quickly and display our comradeship. Asif's Spanish is way better than mine. He got the carne asada, a pupusa mixta, and asked if they had Mexican Coke. Honduran Coke, she said. It was July 30th, 2014, another Wednesday. It was the third time Asif and I met up. After the waitress walked away, Asif looked at me and purred, "Good evening, Mr. Goianis." Our paths had crossed a few times before, but it took us a while to realize how close our orbits had been. That day, Obama announced new sanctions on Russia, whose, quote, little green men had taken over the airport, the military bases, and the parliament of Crimea. The Martian phrase was the local parlance for Russian soldiers in unmarked green uniforms. But Asif and I didn't talk about that. I asked him about the exact moment he decided to build a Soviet jet fighter piece for piece out of paper and glue. He told me it came to him while he was in the hospital, that I should remind him to send me a photo of the diary entry. I asked if he remembered the date, and he said, yeah, exactly, July 2009. Asif then leaned over and handed me a white standard envelope. It felt fat and illicit. It had $500 in it. I hadn't asked Asif for money. I'd asked if he'd be cool with me writing a book about the plane, but he wanted me to be part of the team. Looking back, I realized he also just knew that I needed the money. As I listened to the recording of this interview, there's no mention of the exchange. All I hear is Asif's voice, my voice, and the dee-dee-dee-dee of the guitar. If you were to examine Asif's voice geologically, the striations would be Miami bro and southern twang, high-pitched vocal fry, and traces of Urdu around the edges. It cracks with sincerity, trills and trembles, moves from quickly manic and highly compressed to a slow, deliberate drawl. He does impressions, coos and cajoles, takes the tone of imparting a lesson, sings often. I listen to the recording at half the speed so I can type everything out. Asif is a storyteller. And no, I don't mean he tells stories through his art. I mean he's a storyteller in the archetypal sense, a personification of the great and insane human tradition of telling stories verbally. As we finished our food over 2 giant café con leches, he told me some more stories. Then we parted ways. I walked with a bounce in my step, headed down 24th Street till it dead-ended at Biscayne Bay. The sun turned the sky a molten guava, and the islands in the middle of the bay kept their secrets. Down the line of anonymous warehouses, each a mystery till you step in, I spotted a door held open by a taut bungee cord tied to a bright yellow parking pole. The big roll-up door of the warehouse was closed, a deliberate concealment. Peering inside the office door, I saw Asif sitting at his desk, which was a mess of cardboard control panels, X-Acto knives, and journals. When he saw me, he stood up and wiped the dust from his jeans. His smile was wide and warm, a little devilish. "Hi, brother, good morning," he said. He wiped the dust from the chair in front of the desk, thanked me for taking the time to come see him, and told me to take a seat. The room was cluttered with cardboard and random little tchotchkes. Also on the desk were several handmade rulers and a purple compass he made from some trash he found in a dumpster. A little ceramic skull caught my eye. It was wearing a Soviet-style Ushanka hat, the kind with ear flaps. A tiny rotating fan blew cigarette ash around an ashtray until it tumbled out. I watched with the attention of someone recently quit. Asif sat down, leaned over, and opened a drawer of his desk. From it, he pulled a small styrofoam plate, which contained an obviously fake novelty donut. It had plastic chocolate frosting and plastic sprinkles. I looked at it, then looked at the very real-looking AK-47 hanging on the wall behind him. "Go ahead," he said. "Have a bite." It was like coming upon the skeleton of a giant creature. Its spine, the massive cylindrical fuselage, was 48 feet long, resting atop custom-welded hog carts. Asif reminded me that the fuselage is a crucial design component of all planes, missiles too. Basically, it's the cylindrical tube that becomes a load-bearing structure, he said. And the way that we achieve this with our airplane is with polyvinyl acetate, a semi-synthetic form of the organic glue which was used in the old days for violins, boats, and other wooden structures. The wings of the thing hadn't been skinned, so you could see its bones, the dozens of telescoping Russian doll-like tubes. Though you won't be able to see the inside of the plane once it's finished, Asif insists on building the many strange and exotic internal parts of the plane. The monumental sculpture was to contain countless smaller sculptures. In a whirlwind, Asif rushed me over to the dielectric radar cover, asked me if I knew that the invention of TV was because of vacuums. It is. He showed me the ejection seat and talked about Francis Gary Powers, the CIA operative who was shot down over the Russian steppe while mapping Soviet missile sites. Then, Asif led me to the very tip of the forward fuselage, the front part of the plane. He worked carefully to remove the nose cone and handed it to me. It was smooth, papery soft, light brown, an elegant, perfectly balanced work of conical geometry. A grin escaped his chiseled oval head. "It's made of a bunch of party hats stacked on top of each other," he said. My world was rocked. Seeing the plane made me feel like a little kid, excited and a bit stunned, scared even. Not just by the plane, which could crush you like a bug, or by its paranoid complexity, a system-resisting apprehension, but by Asif too, his frenzied monologuing, his non-stop forking tangents. The sensation I got was a creepy but exhilarating roller coaster feeling, the sort of astonished romantic awe when faced with a giant sublime object that memorializes a past that is not retrievable and yet which never leaves us. An uncanny sense that inanimate things have a life of their own, sure, but also that history is sitting in the room with you. The south wall of the warehouse was painted red. 2 red neons, a hammer and sickle, and a Kalashnikov bathed the studio in a communist glow. I started to get the sense that Asif was some sort of double agent, but for who or what, I couldn't yet say. Thanks.